Hello, my name is Kristen Garson, and this is a video about delayed gratification and how to hold the bow on the violin. And I am a violinist, pianist, performer, and teacher. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to hold the bow as it relates to the violin, but first I am going to talk about delayed gratification, and I'll explain why. I've had too many parents, or at least some, say to me, and they don't understand why their child isn't playing the violin at the first lesson, and they get impatient and they don't understand that if you don't hold the bow correctly, that you cannot play the violin. And so the study of any musical instrument involves delayed gratification. And when you study a musical instrument, that's what you're teaching your child and yourself, because you have to make slow incremental progress to be able to play music well. And to be able to play the violin well, the first step is holding the bow correctly. And now I'm going to talk about a study that was done at Stanford University, research that they found that people with this one quality, delayed gratification, are more likely to succeed. In the 1960s, a Stanford professor named Walter Mischel began conducting a series of important psychological studies. During his experiments, Mischel and his team tested hundreds of children, most of them around the ages of 4 and 5 years old, and revealed what is now believed to be one of the most important characteristics for success in health, work, and life. Let's talk about what happened, and more importantly, how you can use it. And it's called the marshmallow experiment. The experiment began by bringing each child into a private room, sitting them down in a chair and placing a marshmallow on the table in front of them. At this point, the researcher offered a deal to the child. The researcher told the child that he was going to leave the room, and that if the child did not eat the marshmallow while he was away, then they would be rewarded with a second marshmallow. However, if the child decided to eat the first one before the researcher came back, then they would not get a second marshmallow. So the choice was simple: one treat right now or 2 treats later. The researcher left the room for 15 minutes. As you can imagine, the footage of the children waiting alone in the room was rather entertaining. Some kids jumped up and down and ate the first marshmallow as soon as the researcher closed the door. Others wiggled and bounced and scooted in their chairs as they tried to restrain themselves, but eventually gave in to temptation a few minutes later. And finally, a few of the children did manage to wait the entire time. Published in 1972, this popular study became known as the marshmallow experiment, but it wasn't the treat that made it famous. The interesting part came years later. The power of delayed gratification. As the years rolled on and the children grew up, the researchers conducted follow-up studies and tracked each child's progress in a number of areas. What they found was surprising. The children who were willing to delay gratification and waited to receive the second marshmallow ended up having higher SAT scores, lower levels of substance abuse, lower likelihood of obesity, and better responses to stress, better social skills as reported by their parents, and generally better scores in a range of other life measures. The researchers followed each child for more than 40 years, and over again, the group who waited patiently for the second marshmallow succeed in whatever capacity they were measuring. In other words, this series of experiments proved that the ability to delay gratification was critical for success in life. And if you look around, you'll see this playing out everywhere. If you delay the gratification of watching television and getting your homework done now, then you'll learn more and get better grades. If you delay the gratification of buying desserts and chips at the store, then you'll eat healthier when you get home. If you delay the gratification of finishing your workout early and put in a few more reps, then you'll be stronger. And countless other examples. Success usually comes down to choosing the pain of discipline over the ease of distraction. And that's exactly what delayed gratification is all about. This brings us to an interesting question. Did some children naturally have more self-control and thus were more destined for success? Or can you learn to develop this important trait? What determines your ability to delay gratification? Researchers at the University of Rochester decided to replicate the marshmallow experiment, but with an important twist. Before offering the child the marshmallow, the researchers split the children into two groups. The first group was exposed to a series of unreliable experiences. For example, the researcher gave the child a small box of crayons and promised to bring a bigger one, but never did. Then the researcher gave the child a small sticker and promised to bring a better selection of stickers, but never did. Meanwhile, the second group had very reliable experiences. They were promised better crayons and got them. They were told about the better stickers and then they received them. You can imagine the impact these experiences had on the marshmallow test. The children in the unreliable group had no reason to trust that the researchers would bring a second marshmallow, and thus they didn't wait very long to eat the first one. Meanwhile, the children in the second group were training their brains to see delayed gratification as a positive. Every time the researcher made a promise and then delivered on it, the child's brain registered two things. Number one, waiting for gratification is worth it. And number two, I have the capability to wait. As a result, the second group waited an average of 4 times longer than the first group. In other words, the child's ability to delay gratification and display self-control was not a predetermined trait, but rather was impacted by the experiences and environment that surrounded them. In fact, the effects of the environment were almost instantaneous. Just a few minutes of reliable or unreliable experiences were enough to push the actions of each child in one direction or another. What can you and I learn from all of this? How to become better at delaying gratification. Before we go further, let's clear one thing up. For one reason or another, the marshmallow experiment has become particularly popular. You'll find it mentioned in nearly every major media outlet. But these studies are just one piece of data, a small insight into the story of success. Human behavior and life in general is a lot more complex than that, so let's not pretend that one choice a 4-year-old makes will determine the rest of his or her life. But the researchers do make one thing clear. If you want to succeed at something, at some point you will need to find the ability to be disciplined and take action instead of becoming distracted and doing what's easy. Success in nearly every field requires you to ignore doing something easier, delaying gratification, in favor of doing something harder. In other words, doing the work and putting in your repetitions. But the key takeaway here is that even if you don't feel like you're good at delaying gratification now, you can train yourself to become better simply by making a few small improvements. In the case of the children in the study, this meant being exposed to a reliable environment where the researcher promised something and then delivered on it. You and I can do the same thing. We can train our ability to delay gratification, just like we can train our muscles in the gym. And you can do it in the same way as the child and the researcher, by promising something small and then delivering over and over again until your brain says, number one, yes, it's worth it to wait, and number two, yes, I have the capability to do this. Here are 4 simple ways to do exactly that. Number 1, start incredibly small. Make your new habit, quote unquote, so easy you can't say no. Number 2, improve one thing by 1%. Do it again tomorrow. Number 3, use the Jerry Seinfeld strategy. Write jokes every day, good or bad. It doesn't matter, but keep writing. The same goes for practicing your instrument. It's okay to have a bad practice. Just keep practicing. Number 4, find a way to get started. Find ways to be comfortable being alone in a practice space or a practice room. You can use meditation or prayer. Sometimes I look at my instrument and just look at it for a few minutes and meditate on when it was made and how it was made, and appreciate it and have gratitude for my instrument. And you can make your favorite tea or coffee or favorite beverage. You can put a stuffed animal in your space. Whatever it takes to make you feel comfortable in your practice space. And I also, for example, sometimes I use low-tech or old technology items when I think I might be distracted during my practice session. I use a kitchen timer or an old phone that has no carrier service. And I also put my smartphone in another room. And if you're expecting people to call you or text you or communicate with you in some way, you can leave messages for them telling them that you don't want to be disturbed for the next coming period of time, however long that might be. And those are some good strategies for practicing and starting with small things. And now as for holding the bow, this video is for parents whose children are studying the violin, and violin students and students of all ages. For me, holding the bow is one of the most challenging things about playing the violin. The important thing is to break it down into simple steps and simplify it and get the student off to a good start. I like to compare it to laying the foundation of a house. Who remembers this Mother Goose rhyme? There was a crooked man, and he walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse. And they all lived together in a little crooked house. And here's a picture. This is something I found on the internet. These are real buildings from actual building in Sopot, Poland. So these are pretty crooked buildings, but somehow they're standing. But we prefer not to have a crooked house, and this is a real foundation, and this is what you're building when you study an instrument. You're building a foundation, like the foundation of a house. And for me, it starts with holding the bow on the violin. If I'm teaching the violin, this is where we start. And here is the bow. Now, when playing the violin, the bow is part of your foundation of playing the violin, and it is your voice. We as teachers want to minimize from the very beginning of a person's study of the violin the importance of a good bow hand, and so many things can still go wrong under the most ideal circumstances. And it is so easy for the student to sound bad if they do not have the proper bow hand, and therefore get discouraged. Being a teacher, I think that it is vitally important that you choose your words carefully. I have heard teachers and method books call it, quote unquote, your bow grip, but I think that plants the wrong idea in the student's brain. I don't want my students to think that they'll be gripping the bow and holding onto it for dear life. I prefer to call it your bow hand. Bow hold is also an acceptable term, I think. We want to hold the bow firmly but gently, and hopefully with enough exploration and practice, the bow and your hand will become one and feel so natural. It also becomes a part of you. Now, for the first week or two of teaching a violin students, I work with them on holding a pencil like a bow. I don't even have the student play the violin. I have them practice holding the bow, holding the pencil rather. And a pencil is a light and familiar object, and I teach a way to hold the pencil that is exactly like holding the bow in a few easy steps. And first, you hold the pencil with your left hand. Bring your right hand up to the pencil, and you see that you have 1, 2, 3 knuckles in each finger, and you're going to place the pencil on the first knuckle here, here, and here, and the 5th finger rests on top of the pencil. Do not apply any pressure, because then the 5th finger will buckle like that, so it simply rests on top of the pencil. And the thumb is bent opposite the 3rd finger to form a circle like that. And so again, first knuckle here, here, and here. The 5th finger rests on top. You bend the thumb, which is vitally important, opposite of the 3rd finger, and then you turn it over. And this is your bow hand. And you can practice this anywhere. The student can practice it at the dinner table or in the car or whenever they have a free few minutes to practice it. It doesn't take very long, only a few minutes. And another good thing about practicing with the pencil is that you need to have flexibility in your bow hand, because you'll be bouncing the bow, you'll be abruptly changing strings, you'll be playing chords with 3 or 4 strings at a time. And so Another exercise I like to do is teaching the student how to rotate their thumb on the side of the pencil, because at times it's a very subtle and very small movement, but at times you may need to or want to change the position of your thumb in an ever so slight way. And then I teach my students also to do this and pull with my left hand, so the fingers have the greatest amount of flexibility that they can possibly have with their bow hand. And again, don't allow this. Just always keep the fingers curved, and the fifth finger rests on top. When they're at the frog, or the heaviest part, which is the heaviest part of the bow, there will be some more pressure on this side of the hand, but still always important to keep the fifth finger curved. Now let me show you how important it is to keep the thumb bent on the bow. If the thumb is not bent, if it's like this, then the student will try to play, and the sound will come out like this, and they won't be able to draw a straight bow. It will go like that. But if the thumb is straight, then they're capable of drawing a straight bow. And the same with bouncing a bow. If, when the time comes for the student to bounce a bow, it doesn't work very well to bounce a bow like this with the thumb straight, because it will come out sounding like that. Whereas if the thumb is bent, then you have flexibility immediately in your hand, and you can bounce the bow, and it sounds decent. Now, when the student comes back to me a week later, or two, it depends on the student. Sometimes it takes 1 or 2 weeks before the student can correctly hold the pencil, and they can show me that they can hold it correctly. Then we apply that to holding the bow, but not until then, and this is where delayed gratification comes in. And I tell them that they can practice it anywhere, in school, or whenever they have a few minutes. And now I'm going to explain the different parts of the bow. This is the tip, and the middle. This is the stick in general, and most people know that the hair of the bow is made from horsehair. This is the grip, and this is the screw that tightens the hair or loosens the hair. And for some reason, this is called the frog of the bow. And now I was curious as to why the heavier part of the bow is called the frog, and maybe some of you in the audience are curious about that. There are 2 reasonable theories that I've been able to find out that explain why. The first is a clever bit of wordplay. The small vise used by most bow makers was to fashion the frog is known as the frock, and this is called a frock, where they made the bow in and inserted the hair into. This term was likely carried over to the finished product, as the frock and the heel of the bow have a similar use, to grip the bow. Thus the heel of the bow became known as the frock, and the term was gradually modified through misunderstood word of mouth. Frock, being a vernacular term, likely went undocumented in official usage, leaving no reason to believe frog was incorrect. So we went from the word frock to the word frog. An alternative theory is that the grip of the bow before it was termed frog was known and is still known as the heel. The soft portion of a horse's hoof is known as the frog, particularly by the English. Therefore, the heel of the bow was named after the heels of horses. Now, I've been teaching for 30 years, so I have seen the bow held just about every way you can imagine. But there are also different schools of violin playing that each advocate a slightly different way to hold the bow. There's the Galamian school, named after the famous violin teacher Ivan Galamian, and there's the Franco-Belgian school and the Russian school. I used to use the Galamian method way of holding the bow, but after some more study with other teachers, decided to hold the bow with the index finger closer together with the other fingers. And this is the Galamian way to hold the bow. The index finger is up higher on the bow to exert more pressure on the bow. And this is the Franco-Belgian way to hold the bow, which I use. And then the Russian way has an index finger farther over the side of the bow. And sometimes the fifth finger is not even on the bow, especially going down and up towards the frog. They might take it off. The Galamian bow hold is a variation on the Franco-Belgian hold, just named for the renowned violinist and teacher Ivan Galamian. As with other bow holds, the Galamian grip aligns the middle finger and the thumb across from each other on the bow shaft. Meanwhile, the index finger rests atop the bow. When the right hand is in motion, the bowing wrist turns outward on up bows. The wrist turns back inward on the down bows. Certain players consider the Galamian grip to be moderately more comfortable than the more common Franco-Belgian hold. And again, it's up to the player to determine that after some time. Now, what are the advantages of the Russian bow hold? Many violinists swear by the Russian bow hold. Here are some reasons why they favor it above other grips. The Russian bow hold facilitates rapid up bows and down bows along the string. It is ideal for nimble passages within violin literature. It provides a light touch, partly due to the index finger resting on the bow at the finger's middle joint. It allows players to guide the bow with their index finger, offering a reliable degree of control. It keeps the bow hairs flat on the string, not angled, as is the case with some other grips. It minimizes the use of the little finger. Some players don't quite know what to do with their little finger. This finger is minimized in a Russian bow hold. In fact, it only touches the bow on down bows. Among the famous players who have used the Russian bow hold are Jascha Heifetz and Nathan Milstein. If you look at archival photographs of these great violinists, you will quickly note the sharp angles and straight fifth fingers in their right-hand bow hands. If you want to check out another violinist, Ray Chen, also uses the Russian bow hold, and you could see his videos on YouTube as well. What are the disadvantages of the Russian bow hold? Although the Russian grip facilitates nimbleness and speed, it does have its drawbacks when compared to the Franco-Belgian and Galamian bow holds. Specifically, it is harder to control than other bow hands, and notably less powerful than other bow hands. And again, this is the Franco-Belgian bow hand. For me, the Franco-Belgian bow hand is the best because it gives the violinist a shock absorber way to hold the bow. I like to compare it to driving a car. Think of sometimes driving over a pothole or a speed bump or a patch or small bump in the road. We have shocks on the car, or otherwise we would really feel every bump on the road, wouldn't we? And here is a cartoon I found on the internet of a car going over a speed bump. So if you don't have those shock absorbers, you're in for quite a surprise. You need flexibility, you need to be able to change strings, you need to be able to change the angle of your hand at a moment's notice, playing chords, changing strings. You have to have a very, very flexible bow hand. Holding the bow the Franco-Belgian way or the Galamian way also gives you that shock absorber, the sudden ways that you have to apply pressure to the bow or not apply pressure. The Russian bow hand does not give you much in the way of absorbing sudden bumps or changes in bow pressure. Holding the bow the Galamian method way is very good, and many violinists use it, but it does, over time, have a tendency to make a violinist more likely to get tendinitis in their right hand and arm. The argument is made that putting the index or second finger up slightly higher on the bow gives the violinist an advantage to press harder on the bow. In other words, you can theoretically press harder on the bow this way, but the longer that you do this over time, it creates stress in here, in this part of the hand here. Doing this for months and years on end creates stress in this part of the hand and then up the arm, and it can have a tendency to give a person tendinitis. And I have found that one can still put plenty of pressure down on the bow with the hand by not doing that, keeping the fingers all relatively close together, but with forearm rotation this way, applying pressure this way with the forearm rotation. Also, some teachers who teach very young children, ages 4 and 5, for example, initially teach the child to put the thumb here. The Suzuki method sometimes recommends that instead of here where it needs to be for the long term. And I actually don't think that's a good idea. Then the child has to learn another way to hold the bow. And I think it's simply better to teach them the correct way to hold the bow from the start. Next, I'm going to talk about spiccato, which is bouncing the bow, and sautiller, which is a French term for bouncing the bow very quickly, really fast, and the difference in the sound and how it sounds different if the thumb is bent or not bent. If your thumb is straight like that and not bent, then it's really hard to produce a good sound. A good sound, kind of rough and not with much resonance. It's just kind of doing that. Whereas if you have the thumb bent, you have more of an arc shape you can use with bouncing the bow, and it sounds better and more resonant. The same is true for bouncing the bow very quickly, which is called, like I said, the sautiller bow bouncing way. It's just very fast. thumb, then it comes out like that and doesn't work. So the bent thumb is critical for being able to play with a straight bow, to be able to have that arcing motion and bounce the bow. That's known as spiccato. And then the sautier, bouncing the bow very fast. Okay, I think that pretty much sums it up for holding the bow. If you or your child is learning how to play the violin, then getting that good start, that good foundation, and taking it step by step will make them enjoy much more making sounds on the violin and giving you or your child the encouragement they need. Because for those of us who have been playing the violin most of our lives, like me, can tell you, playing the violin is challenging enough. Thank you for watching this video. Take good care, be well and safe. Bye-bye.